Ladies and gentlemen, Gerry Donaldson.
Thank you all. I don't work well with this thing in the holster. First of all, it's really glad to see everybody out here. One of the things I want to start off with, and you'll hear me say unalienable rights as opposed to inalienable. In our Declaration, the way it sits, it says inalienable. Unalienable is the word that Thomas Jefferson used. So if you see the bumper stickers in the back, everybody says, well, I think it's inalienable, isn't it? And I'm going, yes, yes, yes. But Thomas Jefferson put it that way, and they've come out to be synonymous. So I use unalienable because I'm saying un. I'm going to touch on a couple of things real quick, and people that know me and have heard me before knows I could probably stand up here for 3 days straight talking. Okay? I can go long ways. I'm not going to do that, and what I said I was going to do is because I was never a history buff until I started just having a gut feeling about 20 years ago that, and it's crazy that everybody says, yeah, we know the government's corrupt, we know that this is the problem, but the fact is that they just kind of go along with it. You choose the lesser of two evils, you do all these kind of things. I started studying. I became a history buff. I started reading the stuff that our founders wrote. You go back in it. Thomas Jefferson wrote 400,000 pages. Oh my God. Think about it. It's massive amount of information that is not taught in our schools. We're taught principles that are flip-flop, 180 from what we actually know to be the truth of our founders. So one of the things I'm going to point out right now before I get started is this. Look at the number of people that are in this room right now and how many empty seats are in here. Now imagine about 70 years ago in a little country called Germany. You could have had a group in here doing the exact same thing that we are right now, and they were a very small minority, but they did not get out and tell their neighbors what was just about to happen to them. They didn't understand what was coming at them to the degree that they actually spoke up. Everybody understands this now, looking back in retrospect. But we've got a big problem when we start backing off on these principles that were embedded in our founding documents. We go back to the Declaration of Independence. Brilliant document, God-inspired in my opinion. Natural law, whether you call it natural law or God's law, it was embedded with these principles for a reason. Now, the Declaration of Independence says that the only reason men create governments is to protect our rights. Is anybody aware of that? Please give me a show of hands. If they're here to protect our rights, and that's the only reason that we have government, then why is it that we tend to find ourselves constantly battling with a government that wants to infringe upon those rights? And by the way, unalienable, inalienable rights, according to Black's Law Dictionary, 6th edition, says rights the government shall not infringe upon because they're so fundamental. That's what it says. It's in the law. So why is it that we're still fighting these things, and why is it that we're allowing politicians to step up and infringe upon those rights? And by the way, it says shall not. That sounds also like the 10 Commandments that John was just talking about. There's a difference between positive law and negative law. Negative law says shall not. Positive law is something that says, well, in this case we'll veer off this way. In this case we'll veer off that way. And I'm going to tell you that's a doctrine. I'm just going to give you the term. It's a legal term. You don't have to know it. And it's called the doctrine of stare decisis. And this is how we got here. This is how we got here. Doctrine of stare decisis says this. I've got a judge. Right back at the time of the founding, where they understood the principles they were operating on. Here's the rights that we've got to protect. Here's the boundaries of the Constitution that we've got to stay within. He's right there and he says, I've got this case in front of me, and he says, well, no, this was not quite right, so I'm going to bend it just a little, right, so that it fits. That becomes a precedent. 3, 6 months, 9 months, a year later, next thing you know, here comes another judge, and he refers back to that same precedent, the one that was just made. And he says, no, this is not quite right either. So he bends it a little further. And then the next one comes along, and he bends it a little further. Well, after 200 years, we're going the opposite direction. We're going exactly the opposite direction. So the doctrine of stare decisis, which was intended to help us, has destroyed this nation. We had checks and balances built into our governmental systems. Legislative creates law, judicial judges the law, and the executive executes or carries out the law. Well, these are the things that we should know. Now, why is it that our public servants, I call them public servants, that's what they're supposed to be, why is it that they want to go ahead and bend these laws? They're violating their oath of office, they know they are, and yet they still keep doing this. And we end up in a room like this, objecting to what they're doing, what they're shoving down our throats. Now, when it comes to the party system, I'm going to touch on that real quick. George Washington, in his farewell address, here he is, he's been in presidency, he knows what's going on, he sees the vision for what's going to happen in America. He says he has two things he wanted to warn about. And he was so adamant about them that he touched on both of them twice. Number one, he says, no entangling alliances with foreign nations. The second thing is, do not form political parties. Now, why did he say that? He said it's going to divide us. And why was that? And I'm going to teach you a little history here that you never hear. Who was in his cabinet? Secretary of Treasury. A man by the name of Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton was an aristocrat that wanted a national government. And I'm going to step back before this here in a second and tell a little more about it. But we're basically living under Hamilton's vision right now. Okay? Hamilton wanted George Washington to be our first president with a lifelong term. Okay? He also fought for a central bank. What's happened to our economy right now? Do you think the bankers have anything to do with it? We're in a bad shape because the fact is we've got a central bank. He tried to push all this stuff and he fought back and forth with Jefferson. Now, I'm going to bring this up too, and this is where I step back. Declaration had already been signed. We'd already fought the war, the Revolutionary War. And we come into this place, once again, where we had to alter or abolish the government. And what they said in the Declaration of Independence is very simple. It just means we want our states' rights, we want our individual rights protected. And that's what we had fought against King George for 35 years before that declaration was signed. Then, we got the Articles of Confederation, a loose alliance treaty between 13 states/nations. They were all individual sovereign nations. So they all come together, and people that have heard this on my radio show, I know you're hearing it again, okay? Because I touch on this very regularly. The fact is, we think that the Constitution went through real quick. No, absolutely not. It was drafted up by the way, Alexander Hamilton, predominantly, and he was a lawyer. What can a lawyer do to words? Okay? Twist, mangle, you know. If you've ever been on the receiving end of that, you know what I'm talking about. So he comes in there and he says, I've drafted this Constitution, this is what we need, and it's more of a nationalized government. All of the Federalist Papers that were trying to support that Constitution were pushed for that. They went in there, and most people today, if you go to any high school student coming out right now, think that they came up with this Constitution and everybody just said, yeah, let's sign here. No. They walked in. First of all, Rhode Island walked out. The whole delegation says, we're not authorized to do this. Half of the delegation from New York walked out. Most people don't know that. So then they had to change that draft that had walked in and add Article 7 so that it didn't have to be a unanimous vote. Okay? The next thing that happened was this. All the rest of the states said, wait a minute, no, this gives way too much power to the federal government. So they locked the doors, kept everybody out for 4 months. 4 months! Scratch through this, can't say that. No, that takes it. So it's like, going with a whiteout. Straight, no, let's say this a different way. After 4 months, they finally came up with something they thought that the states would agree to. George Washington sent it to those states. They objected. They said, no, the federal government still has too much power.